So this was a scary situation that we talked about this morning. An off-duty Alaska Airlines pilot facing dozens of attempted murder charges after allegedly trying to shut down a plane's engine on its way to San Francisco on Sunday mid-flight.
Yeah, so bizarre. It wasn't the pilot, but a certified pilot. So a lot of people are asking a lot of questions. Here's what we know. Joseph Emerson is his name. He's expected in court today. And Charlene, you were talking about dozens of charges, 83 charges of attempted murder. At the time that he was sitting in the jump seat of the cockpit, that's a common process when pilots travel to other cities for work. And when something went wrong, that's when pilots started to signal air traffic control. Here's what happened.
Okay, I'll just give you a heads up. We've got the guy that tried to shut the engines down out of the cockpit. Doesn't sound like he's causing any issue in the back right now. I think he's subdued. What is the threat level? The threat is now in the back of the airplane, so we're reduced on the threat level. We're going to check in with the flight attendant to make sure everything is running smoothly, but it seems like he settled down as soon as he, after one moment of going a little bit overboard, we put him in the back. So
I was panicked. I was alone in the back, and everyone was shifting around, trying to figure out what was happening. After we did land and the gentleman was escorted off, the flight attendant got back on the speaker and said, plain and simple, he had a mental breakdown.
The T-handle, which is what this individual tried to pull on each engine, actually turns the engine off and prepares it for a fire extinguisher. The problem is, at high altitude, you can get the engines restarted. At low altitude, there could be a fatal result.
And sources tell ABC News that right before this happened, the suspect made a comment similar to "I'm not right." And as you heard that passenger say, it sounds like he had some sort of mental breakdown.
Yeah, it's honestly sad. And again, though, dangerous and so many questions. Let's bring in Newscopter 7's John DelGiorno into this conversation. John, great to see you as always. We've been talking about this morning. We haven't been in a cockpit to the degree you have. Can you help us understand just how serious of a situation this could have been, or perhaps was? What is he accused of doing in the cockpit that raised so many alarms?
Well, this is very serious. Obviously, he tried to shut the engines off on the airplane following whatever breakdown he had. A lot of the spotlight today is on that jump seat privilege and who is allowed to fly in the cockpit and when they're allowed. Normally, the airlines, they limit this to pilots, some very select airline operations and management employees. FAA sometimes allowed to jump seat, a handful of air traffic control, and sometimes even U.S. Secret Service. Now, the airlines generally use an automated database to determine the eligibility of whether they're allowed to fly up front. But this really brings a conversation about mental health to the forefront. Some folks that I've talked to in the industry say that this has been percolating beneath the surface for a while. Pilots are beginning to talk about that mental health aspect. Part of a pilot's eligibility to fly is based on regular medical checkups. They have to pass these checkups. But the mental health portion of that, a lot of that is self-reported. So on the one hand, you actually have pilots that are pushing for more stringent checks and more aggressive checks on the mental health of these pilots. On the other side of things, you have a pilots union, which in many ways has never really been more powerful given the pilot shortage, and they're doing everything they can to protect the right of pilots to work. So you have this little bit of struggle that's ongoing right now. Ultimately, this will be up to the FAA. The FAA is an agency that just lays down the law, and they're going to be torn between answering these mental health questions and answering to a pilots union that's really super powerful right now.
One of the most scrutinized, highly vetted careers out there. So clearly there's a miss there that they need to take a deeper look into. John, what would have happened? What could have happened if he was successful?
Assuming that the situation in the cockpit wasn't so distracting, the pilots would have gone through a procedure to try and get at least one of those engines restarted. And from what I've learned, I've spoken to some people, that wasn't out of the question. This wasn't automatically going to be catastrophic, but this was going to be extraordinarily difficult. Could the pilots have gotten the engines restarted and landed safely? Yes, that's a possibility. But also take into account that there's chaos in the cockpit while the pilots are trying to do their duties of getting things restarted. you would have had this third person in the cockpit in an unknown state of mind. So it would have been very difficult, and it would have been a dire and serious situation.
Wow.
And going back to the mental health aspect of this conversation, is there some sort of frequency that these pilots have to get checked, or do they think that needs to be increased or decreased? What's the thought process on that?
Well, the pilot certification is based on a medical checkup. Every so often, every pilot has to pass a certain class of medical exam. For a private pilot, it's not as stringent as for a commercial pilot. The commercial pilot is pretty stringent, and they have to pass that regularly. It is monitored by the FAA. But again, the mental health portion of that, a lot of it is self-reported. So there isn't really an aggressive check on pilots' well-being. They can answer the questions how they feel to answer those questions. And within the pilot community, there's been a push recently to maybe make that more aggressive. But again, you're balancing that with a pilots union right now that's really protecting the right of pilots to work at a time when there's a pilot shortage.
John, it makes me think of that Alaska Airlines flight many years ago. I believe it was Alaska Airlines where the man stole that plane.
Yes.
And
that was the first thing I thought of also.
Yeah, pretty scary stuff. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the expertise there.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.